In the late 19th century, a powerful idea began to take hold among Jewish communities, particularly in Eastern Europe. This idea was Zionism, a political movement born from centuries of persecution and a deep, enduring connection to a historic homeland. For generations, Jewish people had faced discrimination, violence, and forced displacement across the continent. Pogroms in Russia and rising anti-Semitism in Western Europe created a desperate need for a sanctuary, a place where they could not only be safe, but also exercise self-determination. They yearned for a return to the land of their ancestors, the biblical land of Israel, then known as Palestine. It was, a dream of national revival. This longing was not merely a spiritual or religious aspiration, it became a structured political project. Thinkers and leaders like Theodor Herzl gave voice and organization to this growing sentiment. Herzl's 1896 pamphlet, Der Judenstaat, or the Jewish State, argued that the Jewish question was a national one that could only be solved by the creation of a sovereign Jewish state. He envisioned a modern nation, a haven built on a historical foundation. This vision resonated deeply with many who saw assimilation as a failed promise and believed that true security could only be found in a land of their own, where their culture, language, and identity could flourish without fear. The early 20th century saw this vision begin to materialize, albeit slowly. Small waves of Jewish immigrants, driven by both idealism and the harsh realities of life in Europe, began arriving in Palestine. They purchased land and established agricultural communities known as kibbutzim and moshavim, laying the groundwork for a future society. These early pioneers were determined to build a new life from the ground up, transforming the landscape and reviving the Hebrew language as a modern spoken tongue. Their efforts were small in scale but immense in ambition, representing the first tangible steps toward realizing the Zionist dream on the very soil they considered their ancestral home. However, this land was not empty. Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire and was inhabited by a significant population of Arabs, both Muslim and Christian, who had lived there for centuries. In 1917, the Jewish population in Palestine was a small minority, numbering around 50,000 people, which was less than 10% of the total population of over 650,000. The arrival of Zionist settlers, with their explicit goal of establishing a national home, began to create an undercurrent of tension. The dream of one people was unfolding in a land that was already home to another, setting the stage for a future of overlapping claims and profound conflict. The First World War dramatically altered the political landscape of the Middle East and provided the Zionist movement with a crucial opportunity. With the Ottoman Empire aligned with the Central Powers, Great Britain saw a chance to secure its strategic interests in the region, particularly the Suez Canal. Zionist leaders such as Chaim Weizmann, a charismatic chemist and diplomat, engaged in skillful negotiations with British officials. They argued that supporting Zionist aspirations in Palestine would serve the British Empire's goals, creating a friendly and reliable presence in a volatile but vital part of the world. These arguments found a receptive audience in London, where imperial calculations were paramount. This culminated in one of the most consequential documents of the 20th century. On November 2, 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour sent a letter to Lord Rothschild, a prominent figure in Britain's Jewish community. This letter became known as the Balfour Declaration. It was a short but powerful statement, declaring that the British government viewed with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. It pledged that Britain would use its best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object. This was a monumental victory for the Zionist movement, granting it the legitimacy and backing of a major world power. The declaration, however, contained a critical and ambiguous caveat. It stated that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. This clause was intended to reassure the majority Arab population, but its wording was telling. It referred to over 90% of the inhabitants not by their national identity as Palestinians or Arabs, but simply as non-Jewish communities, and it notably omitted any mention of their political or national rights. This careful phrasing revealed the inherent contradiction at the heart of the policy. how to support the national aspirations of one group without infringing on the rights of another who already lived there. The British did not act alone. To ensure the plan's success, they sought and received the endorsement of other Allied powers. France and Italy gave their approval in 1918, and crucially, US President Woodrow Wilson also sanctioned the declaration before it was made public. This international support was formalized at the San Remo Conference in 1920, where the Allied powers granted Britain the mandate for Palestine, legally obligating it to implement the declaration's terms. What began as a British promise was now enshrined in international law, transforming the Zionist project from a private ambition into a Western-backed colonial endeavor with global legitimacy. For Jewish communities around the world, the Balfour Declaration was a source of immense hope and celebration. It felt like a historic injustice was finally being rectified, and the dream of a national return was now within reach. The declaration acted as a powerful catalyst, encouraging increased Jewish immigration to Palestine, especially from Eastern Europe, where persecution remained rife. Guided by the British Mandate authorities, the Zionist movement began to build the institutions of a state-in-waiting. They established political bodies, an education system, and a defense force, the Haganah, all while acquiring land and developing the economic infrastructure needed for a new nation. The reaction among the Palestinian Arab population was one of profound shock, betrayal, and anger. They had hoped the end of Ottoman rule would bring independence, not the imposition of a new colonial project that prioritized the goals of a minority population. They saw the Balfour Declaration as a gross injustice, a promise made by a foreign power about their homeland without their consent. The declaration's failure to acknowledge their political rights confirmed their fears that they were being relegated to second-class status in their own country. This sense of dispossession fueled a burgeoning Palestinian national identity, united in opposition to the Mandate and Zionism. As Jewish immigration accelerated and Zionist institutions grew stronger under British protection, tensions inevitably boiled over into open conflict. The 1920s and 30s were marked by a series of violent protests and uprisings. The 1929 Burak uprising, which began over access to the Western Wall in Jerusalem, escalated into widespread violence across Palestine, resulting in significant casualties on both sides. An even larger, more organized rebellion, the Arab Revolt of 1936-39, was a sustained national uprising against British rule and Zionist immigration. It was a clear and forceful rejection of the future being imposed upon them. The British authorities responded to this resistance with force. They worked to suppress the Palestinian national movement, arresting its leaders and crushing the revolt with military power. At the same time, they largely continued to facilitate the Zionist project, viewing it as the primary objective of their mandate. For instance, the Faisal-Weizmann Agreement of 1919, though ultimately short-lived, had sought Arab cooperation for large-scale Jewish settlement, showing how British and Zionist leaders tried to secure their plans at the highest levels. This one-sided approach deepened the divide between the two communities, entrenching a pattern of violence and mistrust that would define the region for decades to come. The tensions fostered under the British Mandate reached their breaking point after the Second World War. Exhausted and unable to control the escalating violence between Jewish militias and Arab fighters, Britain turned the problem of Palestine over to the newly formed United Nations. In 1947, the UN passed Resolution 181, a plan to partition Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem under international administration. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, but Arab leaders and the Palestinian population rejected it, arguing it unfairly allocated a majority of the land to the Jewish minority. The stage was set for a final, decisive conflict. On May 14, 1948, as the British Mandate ended, Jewish leaders declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The surrounding Arab nations immediately invaded, sparking the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. By the time the fighting ended in 1949, Israel had not only secured its existence but had also expanded its territory beyond the UN partition plan borders. For Palestinians, this period is known as the Nakba, or catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes, becoming refugees in neighboring countries and the remaining Palestinian territories. Their towns and villages were destroyed and their hope for a state of their own was shattered. The legacy of the Balfour Declaration, therefore, is deeply intertwined with the creation of Israel and the enduring displacement of the Palestinian people. The promise to protect the rights of non-Jewish communities was never fulfilled in a way that preserved their national or political aspirations. The conflict did not end in 1948. It has continued through decades of wars, occupation, and failed peace processes. Israel's admission to the UN was conditioned on its acceptance of the right of return for Palestinian refugees, a right it has never implemented. The issues born from that 1917 letter of competing nationalisms, land, sovereignty, and justice remain unresolved. Today, more than a century after Arthur Balfour penned his declaration, its consequences reverberate with, painful clarity. The historical events it set in motion are not relics of the past. They are the living foundation of the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As we see today, in 2025, the struggle over land, security and statehood continues to claim lives and define the political reality of the Middle East. Understanding the Balfour Declaration, its imperial context, its inherent contradictions, and its powerful and divisive impact is essential to grasping why this history remains so profoundly contested and honestly, tragically relevant in our time.